You're tuned in, tuned up, and ready to go. Welcome to Ria's Ham Shack, a weekly conversation about amateur radio, shortwave listening, and radio tech, hosted by Ria Gyro, N2RJ, and heard weekly on WRMI Legends Shortwave. And now, here's your host, Ria.
Well, thank you, Jeff Lawrence, for that wonderful intro. And if you didn't catch the fabulous broadcast we had, the remote, that was pretty fun, right? But anyway, this is Ria's Ham Shack right here on WRMI Legends, and would like to tell you how to support the show. You can go to WRMILegends.com and see ways to support the show. So it is the week after Dayton Hamvention. And yes, we had a lot of fun at Dayton Hamvention. I met up with some of my good friends, hung out with Ted and Holly, hung out with some other people, hung out with ARDC, who are one of the best ham radio organizations in the entire world, and also had a good time looking at new products. You know, I met Ray Novak from ICOM with the ICOM 905. That's a really bold thing that ICOM is doing. I really commend them for that making those bands accessible to the people. And that's what it's all about, for the everyday hams. Okay, so anyway, this week we're going to talk about the wrap-up from Hamvention, but I'm also going to talk about Field Day and how to prepare for emergencies. I'm probably going to generate some controversy with this one because some people won't like what I have to say, but this is how you prepare for emergencies, and I'll tell you exactly how. As always, if you'd like to contact the show, you can do so Ria at n2rj.com, Romeo India Alpha at n2rj.com, and we'll take your questions. But first, let's take a break and come right back. You love the news on Ria's Ham Shack, you're going to absolutely love the news on Ria's Substack. So to go to n2rj.substack.com, where you'll find the news, views, and opinions, and all sorts of interesting angles that you will find nowhere else. n2rj.substack.com. It's a weekly newsletter. It's absolutely free. You can sign up. You can tell your friends. You can learn about all the happenings in ham radio for the past week. And, you know, some interesting news, views, opinions, and commentary, which you'll really not find anywhere else. n2rj.substack.com, n2rj.substack.com. We put it in your inbox once a week, and you get a convenient digest to read everything you need to know about amateur radio. n2rj.substack.com, n2rj.substack.com. Be sure to subscribe. So I went to Dayton Hamvention, as I do pretty much every year. Well, almost every year. I've been going for a long time, actually. Well, not really that long, since about 2006. And it's always been about the friends. I remember sitting in that Hara arena, and even at the lunch, session there. I believe it's one of the scout troops or something does hot dogs. It was always nice hanging out and meeting new hams. I remember that first magical moment. Of course, now, you know, I know everybody. So because I know everybody, I could just go in and walk and say, hey, you know. Anyway, I'll be going to the Friedrichshafen Ham Radio Show in, oh yes, and it's not Friedrichshafen, it's Friedrichshafen. So I'll be going to Friedrichshafen in Germany at the end of June. I hope to meet all of at least some of my friends from Europe there. I know I have a few listeners in Europe. If you want to meet up, by all means, let me know, Ria at n2rj.com. So the next thing that's coming up, at least, and honestly, it's on the same weekend as Friedrichshafen, is Field Day. And the ARL said how it's the biggest event in the world. Well, I disagree about that, but that's neither here nor there, because in reality, the biggest radio event in the world is probably CQ Worldwide Contest. That said, and Field Day is US-centric. So, Field Day is coming up. And people always say, well, Field Day is for emergency communications. And I say this, and people are saying, don't make it a contest. Well, I say this, okay? Make it a contest, because it is a contest, right? And because it is a contest, that's not a bad thing. Don't think contests are bad things. Contests are good things. I'll tell you exactly why. So if you look back in the 1930s when this field day first came about, Hiram Percy Maxim himself, the old man, called it a contest. Of course, Hiram Percy Maxim used to also say 73s, which is another controversial thing, but he called field day a contest. And it is a contest. You make rapid fire contacts, you count points, and you have categories and you have winners. About the only thing you don't have are plaques and certificates, but you do have rankings and such like that. So it's a contest. And this is not a bad thing because contests are probably one of the best, if not the best ways to train radio operators. I will say this again. Contests are one of, if not the best way to train radio operators. And by train radio operators, I don't mean some drill. So back in the mid 2000s, there was a guy, and some of you might know him. He's N2YBB. He is actually a guy I defeated in my ARL election. And Mike Lysenko essentially said, well, we're going to stop doing public service events and start doing more drills. So public service events are another thing, okay? Public service events get you out there and get hams walking and probably some badly needed exercise, but myself included, by the way. And, you also get to meet and greet people. But drills, I've done MCOM drills, and I find them so utterly... I don't want to use the word boring. I just find them kind of ineffective. So one drill I was on, I actually went to an EOC in Patterson, New Jersey. And then we were there working with the local emergency management people. And these people didn't even know their call sign. I mean, what gives, okay? They didn't know their call sign. And they were struggling to operate the HTs. And these are government employees, by the way. They got their ham license, they crammed the test, they passed the ham license, and then they can't do an emergency drill properly. What in the world? Meanwhile, you have a seasoned contest operator who knows how to operate the contest. And this person not only knows their call sign, they know the other people's call sign. They know how to operate the radios. Believe me, they know how to operate the radios. They know how to pick out the stations from the worst of QRM. And for those of you non-ham people in the audience, QRM means man-made interference, right? That's when, Big Joe Kilowatt decides to turn the wick up and basically transmit 30 dB over S9 right next to you. So that's QRM. And it's something you have to deal with in contesting because there's just not a lot of room on the bands to accommodate everyone in the contest. So I've been doing contesting for a while. I've been in contests since about 2001 and serious contesting since about 2007. And I've learned a number of tips and tricks to help me get messages through. I know how to ask people how to repeat their call sign. I know how to piece together information. I know how to operate my radio's receiver to notch out the interference. I know propagation. I know when the band opens and closes. Folks, this ain't rocket science. It's space science. But you know what? Once you get practical experience, you will learn. And I always hear these people saying how the amateur radio license is a license to learn. But a lot of people get the license and they just pick up a Baofeng and they don't do anything else. So I want you to try out training. And you don't have to take part in the big contests, right? You can do a small contest. You can do the North American QSO party, which is a great way to get started in contesting. 100 watts. And then you make a contact. You share your name and your call sign. And that is it. And that will get you off to the races. So if you've ever heard me contest, and there are a few examples on YouTube where people have recorded me, I essentially keep calling, and then I work the contacts, I work the partials, partials meaning partial call signs, I ask for repeat, and I torture myself working the contest. And because of that, I'm confident that I can do emergency communications better than a lot of people because I have been battle tested in a contest. This comes full circle around to field day. Is field day a contest? Heck yes. Yes, it is a contest. And the more we keep hiding from that fact is the more we're just going to tuck our heads in the sand and we're not going to be truly prepared. Okay. So let's talk about Dayton, right? So that's my rant about contesting. So operate a contest, learn to operate a contest, and you be prepared for emergencies. So Dayton. I drove into Dayton in my Tesla. And yeah, you know, all the people asking, well, yeah, how long it take you to charge? Yeah. It took me like 15 minutes to charge, and I charged 3 times. So it charged 45 minutes. How's that? You can't beat that with a stick. So I drove in, you know, I was there on the Thursday, and then Friday the main show got kicked off, and I had a good time. I spent a lot of time in the booth, of course, but I also walked around and I met people. Like I mentioned, I met Ray Novak with the ICOM 905 and the PW2 and all these good products that ICOM has. You know, I have a story about ICOM, by the way. I got my DXCC on an ICOM 7000 in my car, and I got to 300 countries in my ICOM 756 Pro 3. Great radios. And I have my 705. In fact, just this week I was doing a fox hunt and I used my 705 with the kids at Sussex Charter School. They have an ICOM 7300. Anyway, so Dayton was good. I went to a few events. Thursday night, I went to the Flex Banquet, and we had a wonderful talk by Dr. Nathaniel Frizzell. And Nathaniel was pretty good talking about the upcoming solar eclipses. And you can check out his work at HAMSCI, HAMSCI.org. And he runs a HAMSCI, which is a Ham Science Citizen Investigation. And what that does essentially is you have scientists doing real science using ham radio. So he is a professor at the University of Scranton in Pennsylvania. Yes, the office. Okay. So he is there, and he gave a great talk about using software-defined radios to measure the ionosphere, which is important for shortwave listening, by the way. Next up, Friday I had the DX dinner and a wonderful talk by my friend Adrian, and I'm not going to murder his last name, Adrian, K-O-8-S-C-A, and Adrian talked about the 30D expeditions he was on before he went to Bouvet Island. So Adrian's a good guy, and I operated with him at 4U1UN at the United Nations. He helped everything get set up, and good for him. And then Saturday night, I went to the awards banquet. It's invitation only. Michael Coulter, WHCI from Hamvention, he invited us to go, and we went, and we saw some of our great friends, like my friend Joe Eisenberg, K0NEB, and Joe is a kit guru. He loves to build kits. And other people there. Yeah, some people from the ARL too, of course, and others. So that was really nice. You know, so I had a great Hamvention. I'm off to Friedrichshafen in Germany in the near future, I would say, probably within the next few weeks, at the end of June. So I'm going to be jetting off to Germany, and I'm going to be meeting my European ham friends. And yes, I'm aware that some, unfortunately, will be fighting against the bully Vladimir Putin, and some will not be at Friedrichshafen. I'm hoping that there is a miracle. Maybe I can see some of you guys, okay? And of course, we fully support our friends in Ukraine fighting against the brutal terror of Mr. Putin. I don't even call him Mr. Putin. I call him Vladimir the Terrible. Okay, well, that was pretty interesting, and I hope you had a good time with the Hamvention. You want to tell me your Hamvention stories? Email ria@n2rj.com. That's Romeo India Alpha at n2rj.com. And then you could tell me a story about Hamvention. I drove back on Sunday. I drove on Route 80. There are a lot of trucks on Route 80, even on Sunday. And of course, lots of bugs. My bumper got coated in bugs. Ew. So I gotta wash the car off with those. So yeah. Again, I charged like 3 times and 15 minutes each, so no big deal. Well, okay, so that is that. Let's take a break and come right back with the news, which is from my Substack. So one of the great things about having an HF radio is the ability to work DX. But you need to know where you can find this DX, and you can actually find all the latest news, tips, tricks, scuttlebutt, and on-the-scene reports at dx-world.net. That's dx-world.net. My friend Call and his fabulous crew of correspondents bring you all the latest DX news from around the world right into your ham shack. Okay, so check out dx-world.net, and they also supply the news here on Ria's Ham Shack. So if you want to get the source of the news, you go to dx-world.net. That's dx-world.net. And now let's talk about the news. And the news here is brought to you by Substack, by my Substack, n2rj.substack.com. And I put up a bunch of news for Dayton, so I'm going to recap some of this. I'm going to give it some commentary. So first story is that Kenwood has a new radio, sorta. So Kenwood, has been kind of absent from the amateur market for a while. And the reason for that, as stated, is a parts shortage. So as you know, there have been, I believe, 2 factory fires, one of them being a big chip manufacturer, AKM. And that kind of really put the wrench in it for a lot of people who wanted to get parts for everything from radios to audio equipment. I was having problems sourcing audio equipment for my church ministry duties. So I've been kind of, suffering from that as well, too, because of this parts shortage. But in general, Kenwood has been out of it. So Kenwood released this new radio called the D75. It's essentially the same as the D74, which I have. And that radio has been discontinued. But the major feature of this radio is USB Type-C charging. And for those of you who probably don't know, well, USB-C Type-C is a type of USB that offers higher current, higher power charging. It offers up to, I think now they're almost up to 200 watts of power delivery on USB Type-C. But Apple had gone all in on the MacBook Pro, and this has kind of really pushed it forward. So a lot of devices now are using USB Type-C, and in the European Union has mandated USB Type-C for mobile phones. I made a video saying how will this come to ham radio? Well, apparently it's coming to ham radio. I'll explain why in a moment, but the Kenwood D75 is now getting it. It's also getting some software features for APRS and D-Star. So this has been really good. And but like I said, it's not a big change. We don't know the pricing yet, and it's probably going to be unveiled for availability at Tokyo Ham Fair. ICOM released a pair of radios. Well, they didn't really release one of them, but one of them was the ICOM 905, which you've seen a lot about. It's a radio I'm personally excited about, which I want to get my hands on once I get my hands on enough money. But it's going to be pretty good. It is a microwave radio, so you operate 2.4, 5.6, and other bands, and you also can operate 10 gigahertz with a module. As explained by Ray Novak, N9J8 from ICOM, essentially this radio has the 2.4 gigahertz, and that's going to be used as an intermediate frequency. So basically, it transfers to 2.4 gigahertz, and then you're going to have the 10 gigahertz module that's going to take that and up convert it. So it's going to be pretty neat. And it's important because we need to use those bands. And we're going to use those bands or we're going to lose them. And I want to see more radio amateurs making use of those bands. Of course, it's probably not going to stop the government and the wireless companies from a spectrum grab. At the very least, though, we're going to make a college try. A good effort, okay? The YL Spotlight, I spotlighted on Paige Harper, K0PZH. So she started out in the school club roundup. And at the club... this was at the, where was it? It was at W0IO, that school club, right? And she operated, and then some of them encouraged her to license and win the Rookie Roundup SSB. Well, a fourth time ever seen ham radio. Paige was hosted by their Elmer W7II. Sat in a chair, operated nonstop for 6 hours using all dipoles. She won the W0 division and had the highest score nationally. And her score would have won nationally going back 5 years. Okay, nice. So she's going to be pursuing a master's in social work. That's an important field. And, because it helps people who might be in need of some help. We have a silent key to report, Ben Butner, DL6RAI. So Ben was in Aruba. He was working on some pretty old towers at his station, and then the towers collapsed and he fell with the towers. That's very unfortunate. Being from the Caribbean, I do know that the sea and salt air in particular is very, very rough on anything made of metal out there. So it's very, very sad that Ben was cremated and his ashes were scattered all over the Caribbean. Very sad. And Ben was also honored by CQ and inducted into the Contest Hall of Fame. Okay, shifting gears a little bit, Dr. Nathaniel Frizzell, a good friend of mine out here in the Northeast. He used to be at NJIT, but now he has a very nice position at the University of Scranton in Pennsylvania, where he's also running a program called HamSci, so Ham Science Citizen Investigation, essentially where they're using ham radio operators to investigate ionospheric and solar science. Of course, those of you who listen on WRMI know the importance of propagation, but propagation is also important strategically because even the U.S. military and the government are realizing that, hey, satellites could be a problem, especially if one of our adversaries develops the ability to shoot down satellites. And I know a couple of them actually have that, or at least purported to have, and they've demonstrated that capability. So we better watch out. And HF is always going to be there. And it's always good to study the ionosphere, not just for ham radio, but also, we also had a number of effects, like the Carrington event a long time ago disrupted the power grid and all sorts of stuff. So we need to understand. So Nathaniel Frizzell, Dr. Nathaniel Frizzell, W2NAF, he described a lot of his solar research using amateur radio, and he's also hosting this solar eclipse QSO party where radio amateurs are going to be allowed to make contact. Well, not allowed, but encouraged to make contact, and also to report to places like PSK Reporter and the Reverse Beacon Network, basically to gather data. He also showed off a personal space weather station using a very low-cost SDR, software-defined radio. It was pretty good. So he gave that talk at a number of places at Dayton. It's pretty good. Rob Sherwood talked about receiver performance and trends in the transceiver market. Okay, so that was some pretty good talks. Flex Radio celebrated 20 years of innovation. They gave a very, very nice overview of where they were 20 years ago. Gerald Youngblood came on and gave the whole history of the company. And he really, really, he showed how ham radio has benefited from SDR. Of course, Flex is doing more than just ham radio now. They're doing a lot of military contracts and government, and they're doing pretty well. Steve Hicks, N5AC, came up and he talked about an update on the product line. Now some of the high-end military radios are going to be available for civilian purchase, which is probably good. But of course, not the really, really high-end stuff, but some that we civilians can get our hands on. The new Maestro is coming out with enhanced Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, a new battery, which is a common off-the-shelf battery, and a little bit of updated controls. Cost is going to be $15.99, but if you order before June 1st, you get a discount. Software updates of Smart SDR. They're going to have analog meters and a new integration for the Power Genius XL amplifier. And they're going to have USB pass-through, which will allow remote device control in your shack. So, you probably don't even have to mess with Node Red like these guys have been doing. Pretty good. On a sad note, the Flex 6700 has been announced as being end of manufacturing. I have one. But of course, it's still going to get software updates in the near and long term. But the radio is not going to be manufactured anymore. So, this was some big news. And it was expected because that radio has been really long in the tooth. So that was one of my reports on the pre-show. And let's go to the day one. So as mentioned before, I spoke about Kenwood and the future of Kenwood amateur radios. Kenwood is tiptoeing back into the amateur market, and with the D75, of course, they didn't have anything much else at the booth. They had the TS590, and they, of course, blamed the part shortages, which is plausible, of course. And they did say that they're going to have new HF radios, but not right now. It's probably going to be in a couple of years. Watch Tokyo Ham Fair. They're probably, the Japanese companies like to put their announcements at Tokyo Ham Fair. And I did talk about the 905. So the ARL also talked about legislation. So my good friends and former colleagues, John Robert Stratton, N5AUS, and Fred Hoppengarten, K1VR, spoke about the legislation and the Legislative Advocacy Committee protecting amateur radios. So they talked about a number of pieces of legislation that are in front of Congress. And one of them is to enact the change to the symbol rate, meaning that the symbol rate for digital communications on HF will be updated to remove the restriction that's been there for years that kept us basically in the same speeds for dial-up modems that use phone suction cups. So that's one of the pieces of legislation. I can't believe we've been stuck at 300 baud for a long time. But, many people were arguing for and against. And some people made some good points. And some people didn't make some so good points, but we'll see. So they were there discussing that legislation. Also, they were discussing about the other legislative efforts to fix the antenna issues for those in HOAs. And also they're talking about legislation and efforts to address the Forest Service fees. So lots of legislative stuff going on at the ARL. And John and, of course, Fred K1VR are doing a great job with that. At ARDC, and full disclosure, I am on the board of ARDC. ARDC, we held a gathering of grantees at the Dayton Hamvention. So I was there. Our executive director, Rosie, was there. And, of course, a couple of other staffers were there. Phil Karn, K9Q, who's the president, and he was there as well. And, of course, we had a number of people asking questions and expressing appreciation for the grants they've received. We had a few questions from various people, and we gave away stickers, and we demonstrated 44 nets, so pretty good. And, of course, the DX Hall of Fame nominees were announced at DX Dinner. Aricio Al Hernandez, K3VN, and Adrian, I'm not going to bother with his last name because I can pronounce it, Adrian, K08SCA, they were inducted into CQDX Hall of Fame. Adrian gave a really, really, really nice speech about his prior DXpeditions, 31 of them, I believe. The Expedition of the Year went to TN8K to the Congo, which is pretty good. At YLRL Forum, Katie Campbell, KE8LQR, a fantastic young lady, talked about how she got her school club involved in amateur radio and how she recruits. I know her school club apparently is mostly girls, which is amazing, which is great. She explained how they like to get on the air and call people. So that's pretty good. So yeah, so I reported on those things. And then of course the final, I talked about how the ARL basically talked about the finances because they want to raise the dues. They talk about Logbook of the World, where apparently Logbook of the World was DDoSed unintentionally by an app called Grid Tracker. Those of you who don't know what a DDoS is, DDoS, let me take you back to the days when you used to call into your radio stations and try to win a prize. So what happens is everybody calls in at once, the phone circuits get overloaded, only one person gets through, or eventually the whole thing just melts down. Well, or what happened with Ron DeSantis and Elon Musk on Twitter, where everybody was trying to get in and the whole thing melted down. So essentially, the ARL's Logbook of the World was DDoSed by a program called Grid Tracker. So Grid Tracker essentially tracks, it allows you to do some statistics and mapping with your log and track grids worked and other things worked. And Grid Tracker put an update where it would download the log every 15 minutes and then it would retry if it failed and just kept retrying and just kept hammering. So essentially you have logbook like a dead horse on the ground and people still kicking it. No. Well, anyway, apparently they adjust some things to see how logs are ingested into ARL and Logbook of the World, and that seemed to work. Rick Roderick talked about the Year of the Volunteer, and the ARL is hosting an event at vota.arl.org. I met up with Ashar Farhan, VU2ESE. He demonstrated the SBitX, which is a really nice software-defined radio. It has transmit coverage from 80 through 10 meters and receive coverage from 100 kilohertz to 30 megahertz. It has FT8 built in, and it's easy to remote via the web interface, and it uses a Raspberry Pi. It's entirely open source, which is great. And you can buy one for as little as $200 to $300. Really good. And then finally, I caught up with Moner Salem K6AQ, and Moner, he presented updates to the free DV in the digital voice form, and this improved bandwidth utilization and voice quality. Of course, more Hamvention award winners. So this is Hamvention, Club of the Year, the DVRA, Delaware Valley Radio Association. Technical achievement went to Dr. Jim Breakall, WA3FET, and he did a lot of stuff. So Delaware Valley, by the way, Joe Taylor goes there and he does moon bounce with them, and they mentor a lot of new hams. Technical achievement is Dr. Jim Breakall. Jim Breakall, he has developed antennas at Arecibo in Puerto Rico, and also the HARP in Alaska, and he has developed a number of different antenna designs and enhancements in theory. Carsten Dower, DM9EE, you may know him because, especially those of you in Ukraine or those of you supporting Ukraine, Carsten drove across to the Polish-Ukrainian border and delivered humanitarian supplies. He also has a hotel, and he put a number of Ukrainian refugees in Germany in his hotel temporarily until they found permanent housing. Really good. Contest Hall of Fame, this is from CQ Magazine. Kirk Pickering, K4RO, he was a founding member and past vice president of Tennessee Contest Group. And he has, he's done a lot of contesting. He was a past editor and columnist for NCJ. Ken Clarbout, K4 Zulu Whiskey, accomplished contester, and he was in Ethiopia at ET3AA. So this is a radio club in Addis Ababa University School of Electrical and Computer Engineering, and he helped students install HF skimmers in Africa. And he's he also been with Yasmi Foundation and PVRC. And of course, Ben, DL6RAI, he is a contest administrator. He's operated from 49 different entities. He was a co-founder and past president of Bavarian Contest Club, BCC, in Germany. And he helped develop and maintain the club's DX cluster, the first in Germany. He was a past director of Worked All Europe DX contest. And he's also a former member of the CQ Worldwide Contest Committee. He served as IT manager for WRTC 2018 in Germany. And he's been a beta tester for WinTest software. So, of course, you know his story. He became Silent Key after a tower accident in Aruba. Amateur Radio Hall of Fame inductees: Andy Andros, W0LTE, Silent Key, brother of Ted Andros, W0URN. He was one of the founders of High Gain and the first antenna, the TH3 tri-band trap beam. It got the company off to a solid start. And then the company went on to become a major player for amateur CB and military. MFJ, of course, bought the business, and they are making high gain antennas. Then the next nominee is Jack Curtis K6KU. He revolutionized CW keying by developing circuitry for iambic memory keyer and putting it on a chip. And these chips were later integrated into many commercial transceivers featuring built-in electronic keyers. And finally, Jerry Lawson, WA6LVN, also Silent Key. He was one of the pioneers of home video games. He helped to develop the first cartridge-based video game controller, which allowed users to switch between multiple games. And he was one of the first few black engineers working in the computer industry as the first video games were developed. And really proud of him. You know, he did a lot for a lot of people, and he helped a lot inspire a lot of people of all races, but particularly, you know, young black kids who want to get into software engineering. So we celebrate him. At Dayton Hamvention, I made contact with Carlos KD9OLN, and he basically jumped out of a perfectly good airplane and with a parachute, and then made ham radio contacts all the way down. So you could see some contacts there as well on the Modern Ham channel. You'll see where he made contact with a number of people. He also made contact with Rosie, the executive director for ARDC. It's pretty good. So that was my Hamvention coverage. That pretty much took up all of the news. I will have more general amateur radio news next week. But this week I dedicated to the coverage of Hamvention. I'm going to talk about as well. But one item I need to mention is that Joe Biden, the president, has nominated 3 nominations for the FCC. And one of them is Anna M. Gomez for the vacant seat. And Jeffrey Starks and Brendan Carr, they're going to be renewed. Gomez, she, of course, was an attorney. She spent a lot of time at the FCC. Sorry, not the FCC, the NTIA. So she has been a part of the NTIA. Now, the NTIA, as you know, is a spectrum regulator for the government, right? And she did serve at the FCC as well. So she was deputy chief of the International Bureau, and she was a senior legal advisor for the chairman at the time, William Kennard. And yeah, so that's good. You know, the previous nominee they had was Gigi Sohn, and Gigi was, well, you know, a bunch of people attacked her because she was sort of an activist, and she was associated with various organizations, and you know, it just got ugly. So I'm hoping maybe we could get this person, Anna Gomez, in, and hopefully get the FCC up again. Now, this will be short-lived because one of the terms is expiring at the end of the year, and then Joe Biden will have to fill another seat, so it's going to be a little while, you know. But Gomez, one of Gomez's priorities is rural broadband, and I don't know, that might lead to more demand for our spectrum. But who knows? ARRL and FEMA signed an agreement, and ARRL and FEMA are now cooperating more. So they stated on Twitter saying that they signed a new memorandum of agreement with ARRL, establishing their partnership with licensed voluntary amateur radio operators to support response and recovery efforts, and they're honored to work side by side to meet the millions of the goal for millions in the wake of disasters. Okay. All right. Well, that is the news for this week. And when we come back, we'll talk Q&A. All the ways to listen to Ria's Ham Shack. Let me count the ways. The first and the best way is, of course, on WRMI Legends 5050 on your shortwave dial and other frequencies as appropriate. You can also listen on the podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can listen on WRMILegends.com, where we have it on the live stream. You can catch it on the Ria Ham Shack YouTube channel. Just look for youtube.com/@N2RJ. I publish a show, and it's always a few days after it airs on WRMI Legends. And if you want to get the show first, you go on WRMI Legends 5050 shortwave or on WRMILegends.com. Of course, you can also go on WRMILegends.com to find out ways to support the show and support the station and to keep the tubes glowing and keep the fabulous shortwave programming coming. Now, back to Ria's Ham Shack. Okay, here's your favorite segment, the Q&A, questions and answers, where I take your questions and I give you some answers. You can send your questions to ria@n2rj.com. That's Romeo India Alpha @n2rj.com. And let's take some of your questions and answer them. I also take some questions from some of the Facebook groups that I moderate and that we enjoy welcoming people. So we have Ham Radio /New to the Hobby on Facebook, and also Ham Radio 2.0. Okay. So Matt asks here, quick question. Putting up an antenna on a fiberglass mast. It will be a permanent installation. Would it be okay to use stainless zip ties to secure the coaxial cable to the mast? He's using LMR 400. So stainless steel zip ties are not bad. Actually, stainless is great because a lot of antenna hardware is stainless steel. And the advantage of stainless steel is that it doesn't corrode as readily as, let's say, steel, like galvanized steel or something like that. But it's good. They could be a little more pricey. But, you know, you have some alternatives. You can put a couple of layers of Scotch 33 or Scotch 88 tape around the coax. And you do that, and then you put the tie on top of that. It will actually give it a little bit of insulation there and prevent problems down the line. So, yeah, so that's one way you could do it. But yeah, totally fine. I've also used UV resistant black ties. Those seem to work fine, and you know, they last a long time. So those are perfectly okay. All right. So Harvey asks, he's looking to get a ham radio laptop since his desktop is in death rows. What kind of maximum options should he ask for? He's not looking for the cheapest, but the most expensive. Well, you know, and he wants to handle FT8. That's the most important thing. So the important thing, yeah, so for FT8, you do kind of need some processing power, although I have run it, and I've done video on the Evolve 3 Maestro, which is a cheap $60, it used to be $60 at Micro Center laptop, right? And I just basically, well, I've run FT8 on that. I've run a Flex Radio software, which takes a fair amount of CPU power. Those laptops only have like 4 gigs of RAM, which is amazing for what they do with only 4 gigs of RAM. And I've had no problems with those. I've also run the Asus laptops. They're about $110. You could probably find them at Best Buy and Micro Center. The E410MA, you find those, and those are able to run your ham software. So those are cheap. And the mid-range, you know, I would go for something. If you want something mid-range, I would go for something with at least 8 gigs of RAM and a good processor, either AMD or Intel, and you run that. I run a MacBook, and the problem is MacBooks are great. The only problem is there's not a lot of ham software for them. All of that is changing, especially since a lot of open source software is written in cross-platform languages, which essentially means that they could run on any operating system. Okay, so that's good. I mean, a lot of software now runs on Mac because it's designed to run on Linux and Raspberry Pi and all sorts of stuff. So next question, D writes, looking to get into POTA, that's Parks in the Air this summer for the first time. What would be a good inexpensive coax to use if you're just going to toss up a wire 10 meters with just 10 watts? What approximate lengths should they consider? So for HF, RG8X is okay, and it's less than 1 dB loss for 50 feet. It's not heavy at all. If you're using RG8, I mean, that's kind of overkill for HF, and you'll be lugging that thing around, especially if you're hiking. It's not going to be fun. RG58 is okay, and you use one with a foam dielectric, so, that'll work too. Yeah. And I did release a video about the RF exposure, so let's talk about that next. So one person asked, why should I bother about RF exposure? So RF exposure is the FCC's new standard if you're in the United States. And in other countries like Great Britain, they have this, by the way, where you are required to evaluate your station for compliance with the FCC's RF exposure rules. And these rules are to prevent too much RF from hitting yours and others' living tissue and causing heating effects. So you have to do this evaluation. You can do it in several ways. The most common but yet conservative way is that you do an MPE calculation for maximum permissible exposure, MPE. And then what that does is that gives you a safe baseline, a safe margin in order to calculate how much RF exposure is needed on your end. So you can actually do that. I have a video. You go into youtube.com/@N2RJ and you look for RF safety, and you'll see my video, and I run you through the calculators and everything. I've done that. It's a great video, if I must say so myself, and you can go on there. And I give you access to I give you the best calculators. The ARL has some stuff too. You can go to arl.org/RF-exposure. You can use theirs too. But I have one there with links to multiple calculators, including a very good one. Okay. Let's see here. So, the other one here is that, has anyone here done satellite QSOs with just a handheld antenna? So do you need a Yagi, or can it be done with an HDR base station? So you can actually do it very easily with without a beam antenna if you have enough power, right? So if the satellite's low on the horizon, you can use a home-built Yagi, or you could just sometimes you can even use a high-gain rubber duck, but it might be tough. You could get an arrow antenna. It's about 100 and change, so you can use that too. Those are pretty good for basic use on satellites. So this one is not so much a question as it is a request for an opinion. Somebody asked me, what do I think of D-Star? I think it's a mode. It's an interesting amateur radio mode. I don't mind D-Star. Actually, I have 2 D-Star radios. I have an ICOM 705. I have a Kenwood D74. And I like it. I use it. It's not what I would consider my everyday mode of choice, but I get on there sometimes. So it's good. And I even have a D-Star repeater project that I've been languishing on for a long time, but eventually I'll get it done. But the problem I have is that a lot of these digital radio protocols rely upon proprietary software. They rely upon proprietary chips. So this is kind of a point for me. I want to move into the direction of open radio protocols such as M17. And M17, if you look at it, you'll understand why it's important, because it's an open radio protocol. It leverages open source software, and it's completely open. So that means that everybody can look at the source code. Everybody could look at the inner workings of it. And you don't have to buy proprietary chips from a particular manufacturer, right? And I personally believe that in ham radio, that is important because everything in ham radio is supposed to be open. Ham radio is supposed to be a friendly place for experimenters. So if you haven't checked out M17, you could go to M17 Project. You go to M17, that's M17project.org. And you can see a lot of their spec. You can see how to get on. You can actually flash some existing radios. Not any from the big four, but you could flash like radios from like TYT and such like that. And they have a full description of the protocol. Okay, and you could also, you can add it to Pi-Star. You can order GLPCB, module 17 is a GLPCB, GLC PCB, sorry. So you can order all sorts of things, and it's a nice DIY project. So I do like stuff like that. You know, I mentioned before the BitX, and the BitX is open source. And open source doesn't really mean free as in no cost. It means free as in freedom, right? It doesn't mean free. I tell people it's the difference between free speech and free beer. Free beer costs nothing, but in the end, all you do is you get drunk and stupid. Whereas with free speech, you know, you become enlightened, okay? You say what you want, you become enlightened, and then people see the truth. So, yeah, you know, it's something like that. So I support that, and I hope that you will too. Okay, question here from Dave Atkinson. He says, can you receive any transmissions with no antenna? He's got an old HU-145A, and he can't pick up anything. Well, the answer is not really. So, and the answer is kinda. You have to remember that everything that exists in the universe is an antenna to some degree, because it'll receive these waves, these radio waves, and convert them to alternating currents. The problem is that a lot of these are so short that you cannot really receive anything much with them. So you definitely can't receive really long wave signals such as, you know, AM broadcast or FM, well, you know, FM sort of. And you might be able to receive some at higher frequencies, but generally you can't. So the other thing is the antenna connectors on all of these radios are shielded, meaning that they're shielded so that they don't pick up anything without an antenna connection. And that's by design. So you generally have to connect an antenna, and you should connect a resonant antenna if you want to get the best signal quality, meaning the most strongest signal. Resonant simply means that it's cut to the length that receives the that is tuned to that particular radio frequency. Okay, so something like a dipole cut for that particular length is pretty much what you're looking for, right? And sometimes, you know, if you have a strong enough signal, you can use a non-resonant antenna. Like in the early days of DTV, when I lived near to the transmitters, I put a paperclip in the antenna socket, and I was able to hear things. So that's really, you know, that's really all there is to it. And that's pretty much what I'll tell you. Okay. So Emily says here, we're trying to find a way to put up an antenna, but are dealing with HOA rules. Can anyone help guide me? So the HOA problem that the ARRL has been trying to unsuccessfully solve for decades now, and probably will solve it sometime in the future, hopefully. The HOA problem can be solved in a number of different ways in the meantime. The first way is really just to move out the HOA. All right, just kidding. Not everybody can do that. I can get it. The second way, which is not really moving out, is you get a mobile station like me, and you drive to somewhere and you operate there. Okay. Another way, if you have an access to an attic, you can put a dipole in the attic. And a lot of attics, a lot of roofs are not really insulating radio waves, so they're not made of metal. You can easily still use the attic for an antenna. Works well. Just don't run high power. You could probably cause a fire. But that works well. Other thing, too, is you can use as a flagpole. Hams are very patriotic. Yeah. You put a flagpole that's like 43 foot high, and you celebrating Memorial Day. Hey, you have an antenna. Or if you're on 2 meters, you can put an antenna indoors and it'll be effective. You could use a small antenna like a mag loop. You can also use other antennas. You can operate remotely, which means that your transmitter and receiver are somewhere else, either at a friend's house, or you pay for one of these services like Remote Ham Radio or Be Loud, and you use that. You can also paint an antenna green and put it in a tree that nobody will see. But, there's several ways to get into it. All right. And, okay. So one question here. Should I use a headset or a speaker mic? Well, a headset actually is good, but I find that I like speaker mics the best because headset covers your ears. And sometimes you need your ears to do stuff. The speaker mic is good. I could keep it right on my shirt, clipped on at the top, and I can just squeeze it and talk whenever I need to. So those work well. I really enjoy using those. And I have a speaker mic for every radio that I have. And that's pretty much how I do it. It's pretty much how I do it all the time. Let's see here. If I buy an RF scanner, is there a frequency where people talk about the traffic jam up ahead? Or should I stick with CB for that? Well, there are several ways to do that. This is from Rostislav Persion. I don't know if that's his real name. But if you use a scanner, you could probably listen to some of the police, even though a lot of them are going digital, and frankly, some of them are being encrypted. And I have things to say about that. I don't think that all of the police should be encrypted. Maybe just counterterrorism and narcotics, yes. The rest of the stuff, no. But you can do that. Or you could just listen to CB. The truckers talk about it all the time. The truckers talk about traffic jams, and they talk about the speed traps and such like that. So that's one way to do it. Channel 19 on CB radio will get you there. Okay. Let's see here. Any recommendations for a CW keyer that won't break the bank to assist with learning code? Well, that's not the way to learn code, first of all. The way to learn code is you go online, you take classes with either Long Island CW Club, or you go with the CW Ops, or you could use Fabian Kerr's LCWO, LearnCWOnline.net, LCWO.net. If you want to learn Morse code. Of course, you don't have to learn Morse code to get a ham license these days. But it's always good to know because you work the best DX on Morse code. Well, that'll do it for this week. This is Ria's Ham Shack right here on WRMI Legends. Thank you for joining me along for the ride. Be sure to check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@N2RJ. And I hope to see you again. I will be at Huntsville. And of course, for my international audience, since we are international on shortwave, I will be at Friedrichshafen at the end of June. So look out for me there. Look out for me on my YouTube channel. Look out on my social media. I will tell you. You could go to twitter.com/@RiaJaram. You could go to Instagram @RiaJaram and you'll see me there. That's RiaJairam. And you can look for me there. All right, would like to thank all those who made this show possible, especially the WRMI Legends crew. That includes Ted Randall, Holly, and of course, Jeff Lawrence does our voiceovers. Yay for Jeff. All the jocks and stuff like that. I hope you enjoy the great music. And of course, let's not forget our fabulous team, wonderful team, keeping the tubes glowing and keeping us on the air and coming right at you on WRMI Shortwave Radio down in Okeechobee, Florida. If you want to support the show, you can go to WRMILegends.com and show how to support the show. Finally, if you have an Alexa device, you can also listen to our show. You go ALEXA, I wouldn't say the word, play WRMI Legends. My friends, until next time, peace and 73. Happy Memorial Day. The opinions expressed in this show do not represent those of any amateur radio or other organization. They are solely the opinions of Ria Jaram N2RJ and are not approved by anybody. Take care.